Hello and welcome to the Who the Fuck is in the Mirror podcast. I'm Angela Spooner, your host, emotional intelligence guide, trauma-informed coach, yoga instructor, confident, badass single mom of 3 amazing children, and founder of Unabashedly You. This podcast is all about using books, analogies, and metaphors to dive deep into who you really are to yourselves, not just as parents or some fictional version others made you out to be, right? But who the fuck you are. I want you to find your confidently badass, secure version of you that you lost along the way, or maybe you never even had in the first place because you were like busy with everyone and everything else. Does that sound about right? So how about we get into the science of why we are a bunch of fucked up individuals who look in the mirror and don't even recognize the person that's staring back. Join me in the best journey you'll ever experience. Why, you may ask? Because it is the journey to transform your self-doubt, insecurity, and overall dysfunctional brain into self-aware, badass confidence and understanding. I hope you're as excited as I am because I cannot wait to get into this.
Welcome to the carnival. Welcome to the carnival.
Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Who the Fuck is in the Mirror. Today we have a special guest. I'm super fucking excited because he hit me up and I was like, let's fucking do this. Because you guys know how I am. I just rock with it, roll with it, let it happen, right? Because that's what our podcast is all about. And by our, I mean me, myself, and I. You know how I like to do third person conversations about myself, for myself, with myself. It's fine. So today we have Mr. Carpenter, and he is going to just give us a little intro about who he is and what he does. And then we're going to get a little deeper into why the fuck he's on our podcast today. Okay. So without further ado.
All right. Well, let's do the bright, shiny side, right? Everybody's got a bright, shiny side, and then that dark side we don't want to talk about, right? I'm on this podcast because the dark side's got to come out. You either deal with it or you don't. And if you don't, it's going to get you. So I'm going to talk about the bright, shiny side. I grew up in a gospel band, super conservative Christian values. Today, I would say it was a cult and I could define that for you, but I'm not going to waste your time. Basically, once I didn't believe what they did, then I was shunned. And that's kind of the core definition of a cult. You see them every day, actually, at work or at church, wherever it is that you find a group of people. So once I didn't believe what they did, then it was like, you're out. We're not going to your wedding. We don't want anything to do with you. You can't talk to the other grandkids, nieces and nephews, etc. You're out. So that was how it turned. But the bright, shiny side is I'm a very good musician, an excellent piano player, music producer. I'm an author since I went through this process of very similar to what you shared with me before the show of dealing with my own trauma, etc. That brought me to becoming certified as a life coach. And that's why I'm here today. I love helping other people find whatever this means to them. Each person seems to be very different. So I just hand them the tools that I was given and they go from there. That's the bright, shiny side.
Right. Bright and shiny side. So fuck the bright, shiny side because who gives a shit about that if you can't get to the deep stuff, right? See,
Agreed.
And Josh, I actually talked to a guy yesterday and we were talking about my podcast and everything. And he said, I want to do what you're doing, but the opposite. And I said, I don't know what the fuck that means, bro. And he was like, I want to help men that have gone through stuff, but their day-to-day life. And I said, oh God, you really don't know what I do you? I said, you do realize that the reason I dig deep is because all that shallow shit is just that. It's fucking shallow shit. You're going to sit there. You're going to be happy, feel good, feel great. Yes, yes, yes. Wonderful. Everything's fantastic, right? Fucking wrong, because 2 months down the road, or maybe even a week down the road, or maybe right after you're done with whatever it is, right? You're like, well, now what? What the
Yep.
fuck do I do now? And that's exactly why I do what I do. Josh hasn't even listened to my podcast, guys. So, give him a little shame, give him a little shit, okay? Because he's like, oh, I haven't listened. I'm like, oh, well, good thing, like, he's not like this person that's like, hello, Angela. Namaste. I mean, you can say namaste. I'm a fucking yoga instructor, but you know what I mean, guys.
I
Those
do.
people that just, they're like, everything is wonderful and everything, calm the fuck down. Like, what you need to work on.
Yep.
And just giving that superficial is never going to get you there.
I hate
Never going to get you
superficial.
to that point. And you can't get to the good shit
Yep.
until you deal with the shitty shit.
Yep. Yeah, I fully agree. A lot of times the superficial is covering up things that really should be shared, should be talked about, because it would help us all learn. Would help us all learn if I would share my real story instead of
Exactly.
pretending to be something I'm not, right?
Right. So that
Yeah.
being said, I know you mentioned just now
Yep.
before, well,
Yeah.
before we started going on the podcast, we were talking about this.
Yep.
So nobody else was fucking listening. So how about you go ahead and just erase that from your memory? Act like I'm listening to it
Right.
first time, because every
Right.
time's like the first time.
All right. Well, I'm going to start out with I told Angela why I wrote my book. That's why I'm an author. It's called You're Not One of Us. And it talks about leaving a conservative Christian cult. So we were singing gospel music all over the country. My friends, everybody that we had a mailing list of 10,000 people back in the day when it was paper, and all the brothers and sisters, all of us folded the newsletters and put stamps on them. And that was a big following back then. We were in the top 1% of music groups in the country, primarily gospel, a little bit of country, but we were really preaching Jesus. And more than that, we were preaching the Carpenter family. We had a desire. My mom had a desire, but we all followed that. I participated fully in the idea that we were just better than everybody else. We didn't go to anybody else's church. We kind of formed our own little thing. What was going on backstage, though, was severe fighting, abuses on all different levels, verbal, emotional. I will say very little sexual abuse that I know of. But I was a guy. I don't know. I know how things, I know what the stats are, and I have no idea what might have happened to my sisters. But I grew up with a very abusive, and for the purpose of this podcast, it might be worth focusing on emotional abuse. My mom was extremely emotional abusive, probably to this day has mental issues, but that haven't been diagnosed. And I say that without malice, right? You can have a mental issue. You can have a true undiagnosed or untreated bipolar, and that can make you treat people really, really badly if you don't get it treated. So that's what I grew up with. Lots and lots of guilt. To get right to where you want to go, one of the most shameful things, we do a class called Deepest, Darkest Secrets. And I did the class 4 times. Most people have a hard time doing it once. But every time, when I did it the second time, my friend, who's now a really good mentor and I look up to, he said, if you staff think that you're going to do this class and share the deepest, darkest secrets you shared the first time, wrong. Your students, your little group of 5, will not follow you into their deepest, darkest secrets if you give an easy answer. So every time I found something deeper and more shameful, till I finally found something I didn't even want to share with my wife and never had. So I'll start with the lightest one, right? Maybe we'll do more podcasts. I'm not going to overwhelm you with all the stuff. But the most embarrassing thing that I could think of in that first group was I was 15 years old. I'd been taught nothing of sex. I had discovered masturbation, and my mom caught me. Still makes me ashamed to this day. I know it wasn't right. I didn't know why. I had no idea. Or I should say, I felt that she would know that it wasn't right. Now, to this day, I don't have any problem with masturbation, but at the time I knew she wouldn't like it. And of course she didn't. And to be fair, what mom wants to walk, like, that's not any woman's favorite day, right? Like, so how do we deal with this? So where the emotional trauma and abuse started was that she sat down and she said, "What are you doing?" And it was obvious. So I didn't answer because I was deeply red-faced, embarrassed. And she said, "Okay, well, you know this is wrong." I didn't
Wait,
answer.
hold on. I'm going to stop
Yeah.
you there. So
Yeah.
wait, she walked in on you
Yep.
fucking masturbating.
Yep.
and sat the fuck down to have a conversation.
Yeah, because it had just
So they did-
occurred. She literally saw like the final ending, right? I mean, that's a point where you really can't hide or stop anything because you don't.
The reason I ask is my 9-year-old, I walked in and he's butt ass naked and he's got soap all in his hands in front of the sink, right? And I was walking in there thinking he's in the shower because the shower's on. He's in front of the sink and he's just hands on his privates. And I looked at him and I was like, it's not even important. I gotta go. Cause I walked in there for a reason. And I was like, we're gonna let you do your thing. I'm gonna be out there. You stay.
Not my mom. No, she sat down and she said, this is wrong. And I didn't answer. She said, so we're going to have to make a plan for you to not do this ever again.
Good God.
Right now I understand how crazy, but there's still a tiny part of me that goes, oh yeah, like that was mom's decree. Like she said, I'm going to have dad talk to you, which was far too late, right? You're 15 years old. Like that should have happened a long, long time ago.
Right.
This is how delusional my mom is to this day. But she said, so what we'll make sure you don't do this again. So if you do this again, you need to come tell me, and then you have to fast. So our family, fasting was a very biblical thing that you did, sort of self-punishment. So you don't eat for a day, right? It meant no food for a day. You could have water, but no food, no juice, no kind of sustenance. And I had done that a lot. I wasn't deeply afraid of fasting, but nobody liked it. So that was my punishment. In that, I began lying because there was no freaking way that I was going to stop masturbating. But I told her a few times and fasted, because if you told her that, I was deeply afraid of my mother till I was 27 and left. I'm probably still afraid of her to this day, to be fair. I think Candy would say the reason we don't go home is because she doesn't like who I become when my mom takes charge of me. And as a powerful life coach and producer and singer, I don't want to be that guy. But when I go back there, that's what happens. So it's such a toxic pattern that I have not figured out in my life yet how to break it. But at the time I was like, okay, well, I got to tell her, but I didn't. And that was when I stopped being a super honest, really open human. And I started going, well, the only way to do it is do it and don't tell her. And I felt horrible guilt about that, just horrible. And then I would stop for 3 months. 3 months was probably my record. And it's for 3 months, nothing, and miserable, grumpy. I think of my sisters must have thought, what is his problem? Like, well, you've got a lot of built up pressure and a lot of guilt and a lot of frustration. So there you go. That was my first, deepest, darkest secret, where I didn't want to share that with anybody because I was sure that I would get in trouble. I was sure that people would think less of me. I had no idea that the rest of the world looked at that a lot differently than I did. And in fact, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and the interesting part that you said there, that the rest of the world, here's the thing though, everybody thinks differently about fucking everything.
Everything.
Right?
Really
like
true.
you could be the most religious person and be a child molester, right? Or most religious person.
I've seen it.
So it's all in perspective. It's all in perception. It's all in, what do you have as your values, your beliefs? What are your core beliefs? What's the trauma that you have gone through that has made you think that you are this person? So I find it interesting, and we could talk more about that. I had the same issue where my parents were very religious, and it was kind of like don't talk about those things. Don't talk about this. Don't talk about that. Right. So I was never allowed to talk about it. And so I never knew what the fuck anything was. Right. And so one of my biggest things was when I got older, when I actually started doing the work on myself, when I was like, holy shit, like I'm fucked up. I was like, wow, like I am this completely, like I thrived on making people cry. I thrived on like really hurting people and, just, I think we talked about it before the podcast. I thrived on being numb to feelings and just showing I'm tough. And in actuality, that's the weakest form of you, is that side of you that wants to give that shell and that exterior because you aren't willing to be vulnerable and you aren't willing to be open anymore because of the shame from your childhood. or from a past relationship where they just pushed you down and made you feel like your normal feelings and reactions were not normal, and they weren't acceptable. They weren't socially acceptable. They weren't spiritually acceptable. They weren't any of those things. And so then you're just pushing them down, pushing them down. And then you have that trauma that you and I were talking about with the amygdala, where you have these emotions, you can't process them. So with that, I would love to hear a little more about where you went from there. Okay. Like your mom is sitting here and she's just fucking you up in the head, right? But again, right, when you become an adult, there comes a time when you have to say, this is who I am, right? I know my parents are super religious, and I was sure that one of them was going to have a heart attack when they heard the name of my podcast is Who the Fuck is in the Mirror? You know, my dad looked at my brochure and he's like looking at the things that say damn or shit. And he's like, you could use a different term, right? But then that wouldn't be who I am. Would it be, Dad? It wouldn't be who I am authentically. And I accept me, you
Yep.
know? So if somebody else has an issue with it, then that's all them. They
Yep.
are entitled to that opinion. But with that, let's talk about your trauma deeper down, right? Because that's one instance for you,
Yes.
right?
So
So
deeper than that was definitely, so this is where it gets to I think most of your viewers might be able to see how that was somewhat emotionally abusive, right? Imagine
right,
telling one of your children that you just can't masturbate. I mean, you've now put them in the guilt box where there's
definitely.
no way for them to win, right? So that's a form of emotional abuse. And you'll see it on churches love guilt. There's other groups that love guilt. I'm not going to just name everybody because it's not just the church. But so that was step one. Step two was more damaging. It hurt more because I could lie and still masturbate and still go, well, whatever. My sisters were, I found out later that I was super compliant. Like I was trying to keep the rules. My sisters were like, fuck her. I didn't know that. Right. They were privately doing whatever the hell they wanted with whoever they wanted. Just don't let mom know. She's crazy. I didn't see mom that way. I idolized her till I was 27. So I just felt guilty. If I didn't do what she said, I just felt guilty. So again, different experiences. But what was much more damaging to me internally, because you can feel real damage in your physical body, right? And that goes back to your book, The Body Keeps Score, which I've not read. Again, I feel the energy of things, and I am not discounting. There's so many doors into this work, and whatever door works for you, that's what you should use. So that wasn't my door, but I really, really agree with it because I've met so many people. By the way, the reason I'm on this podcast is not because I've heard your podcasts, but because I worked with you at Big Nose Kate's. We were the band. You were a server, and I watched the walls, that tough exterior that you talked about, come down once you left. I don't think it had anything to do with Big Nose Kate's. It's a great place. It had to do with how you showed up at Big Nose Kate's and how you had to be that person. Then you stopped. You said, nope, I'm going to go do something different. Again, changing a pattern. That is such power. And your face changed. Everything on your Facebook changed from don't fucking touch me, don't, to vulnerability, honesty. And I'm like, I don't need to know anymore. I know where she's going. There 10% of the people I coach actually make a change in their life.
Yeah.
90% will hear what we're saying and go, oh, I so identify with that, but not change a thing in their life. And I'll know it because their face won't change. Their language won't change. So anyway, the more painful thing that happened deeper than that was that because I idolized my mom, and this gets into a class that we do called Victim Responsible. So my big victim story was my mom, I at 23, 25, I don't remember. A bunch of kids came over, church kids and other kids came over, and a girl. We had a lot of kids at our house. We had 7 kids in our family, and then a bunch. We would always have 20 kids would be over, and then so this girl was invited over from a show because girls would see me playing the piano and stuff, and they'd be like, "Ooh, I want to date him." And I was so clueless. I didn't even ask him out. Like I was just so clueless and so mommy whipped, right? So, in fact, I'm sure a lot of my sister's friends thought I was the gay piano player because I just never made a move ever. So, anyway, one of these girls was quite forward and kind of pushed into a relationship with me, and I was like, "Yeah, I want that," but I didn't have the ball Right. So anyway, she got close enough that I was like, Mom, I want to invite her over for this party. So Mom agreed. I don't really know why, but she agreed. Kelly and I went on a walk that night, which was really a big step for Christians. You didn't kiss, you didn't hold hands, which we didn't, but you went on a walk and you talked about things. And so I got really vulnerable with Kelly and we had a great talk. It was a 2-mile walk around the loop. We called it on the farm in Minnesota. And so we did the loop, come back, and I was fallen deeply in love. I mean, head over heels. Because this was my first experience. 24, 25, I don't know how old I was, but I love this girl already. Looking back, even 2 years later, I could see what a shit show that would have been. Like, it was a horrible, horrible choice, but I didn't know that. It's my first choice, right? Should have done it when I was 15. Here I am, 25. So I come home and, all the girls all go to bed with the girls over at the guest house and the boys are up in one bedroom. And, I gave up my bed so that some of our friends could sleep more comfortably. And I was going to sleep on the floor in the library. Wasn't that big a stretch for me. We loved these things. These were parties that went on until 3, 4 in the morning, playing cards. But so everybody finally went to bed and Mom waited and I knew that she was waiting. And she's like, so what happened? And I'm sure she was sure that we were out there having sex or, that she needed to get her finger back on me real quick. So I told her how I felt and that we were going to go on a date. As soon as she got back to Wilmer, as Kelly got back and she said, no, you're not. What do you mean? And she said, no, you're going to break up with her. I've talked to her. She's not even really a Christian. I don't think she's not the right kind of Christian. You're not going to do that. This is a bad choice for you. She was right. Not about the Christian thing, because that would not be the value system I would use. But she was right about us not being a good match. She had been in the world a lot longer than I had, and she could see that this would not work. But where she was wrong, and this is where as a coach I get to practice this, you have to find your answer for yourself. And she totally took that away. So she helped me write a letter that night breaking up with Kelly. Kelly hadn't even left yet. She was over sleeping with my sisters at the guest house and was going to leave in the morning, which she did. So I helped. I wrote the letter, but really Mom dictated it, signed it, knew we were going to send it the next day, went up to bed, and I just laid there with the most intense physical pain in both where I think my heart is and in my gut, 2 different places that I hold stress, tension, trauma. And looking back, I'm still not, it still makes me tense and changes my voice a little bit when I talk about it, because I think at the core of it was probably I let my mother tell me who to be. I didn't stand up to her in any way. Even though she was right, I needed to find that for myself and to be a man. What kind of a man at 25 years old lets his mom tell him that he can't date somebody? So I think it was probably intense shame of myself, a knowledge that I wouldn't fight for what I wanted. Not really, not if it really came down to it. So that goes to my victim story. Now, when I tell it from responsible, it changes everything. Because when you tell your victim story from responsible, you tell the same story, but every sentence must start with I chose. This can be tough if you're a victim of, like my wife, molestation at age 4 until she was 14. When you teach this class, you have to be very clear that we're not talking about fault. If you were 4, it is not your fault that somebody decided to do something to you. Responsible means, though, that I get to list the choices I made throughout the process. And so for me, when I tell that from responsible, when I tell it my victim story like I started with, it makes you feel sad, probably unable to help me because it happened in the past. And even if you had, I was going to listen to my mom. So there was no helping me. My sisters couldn't help me, friends, nothing. But responsible says, I chose to put my mom on a pedestal. I found out later my sisters did not. Privately, they were like, she's a crazy bitch, but they never told me that because they knew I idolized her, right? So I chose to put her on a pedestal. I chose to follow what she said. I wrote the letter. I didn't have to do that. I could have just refused. I could have said, no, make me. I ain't writing that letter. I'm dating that girl on Saturday. We're going out. Like, I did not have the balls, or I'm not going to say it that way. I did not choose to take that stance. I did not choose to learn my own way. I chose to try to learn through someone else. I believed her that she was right to some level and decided to choose to learn that way rather than actually go ahead and have the date and find out why this might not work for me. Once I start telling my story from I chose, almost always we find Not that we were at fault. In fact, almost certainly you weren't at fault. If it's your victim story, I doubt that you're at fault. It's very likely that you were at fault. But I do find that there were choices I did not know I had. My wife would tell her victim story. It would sound very good victim story in the sense that you would say there's nothing she could have done. However, she will also tell you that there were people that tried to save her and she said no. She didn't know that had she just reported to that school officer and actually told the truth, that she would have been pulled out of the home and brought to a much safer place that she actually wanted to be in. But she didn't know that. She really believed that she would be punished, et cetera, et cetera. So when I go from victim story to responsible, that's when I start to realize, oh, so I still have choices to this day. I deal with dominant women all the time. I'm not a dominant guy. So to this day, and I could give you really current stories, I get to put up boundaries and go, okay, I want to serve you. I want to help you. And I still get to protect who I am in that. And you're just being yourself. If you're a dominant woman, you're just being yourself. I'm creating a victim story around you being yourself rather than me going, but I have a choice. I will agree to do this for you. I will not agree to do that for you. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's from a flow with man. That's where victim responsible helped me shift.
So we're going to go a little deeper with that. Okay.
Okay.
Because yeah, this is why I'm like, you should have listened to my podcast. Get ready. I'm just kidding. But I'm
Tell us again.
So here's the thing though, right? Because you can say all day that I chose this and, I could have made a different choice. Here's the biggest thing that I love to say is, why the fuck is it so vitally important that we have to put blame on something?
Right.
Because here's the thing, we put blame on them. Then we put blame on ourselves.
Correct.
Then we say, like you were saying, I chose this, right? And then she went through being molested, and then it was kind of like, oh, I didn't choose that. So my history is I was molested by my grandfather for years, never talked about it. Then had a baby that died. He had Meckel-Gruber syndrome. His brain came out of his skull, and then his lungs didn't develop. So his heart was kind of just hanging in there. My friends at the time told me that they couldn't come visit me because it was too hard for them. And I was like, oh, is it hard for you?
Yeah.
No fucking sorry. Let me know how you're doing after. Right. So then naturally, I started dating a drug dealer who used to beat the shit out of me with a gun because I wouldn't give him head in front of his friends. He would also, just leave me at drug dealers or at drug addicts' houses. They didn't have any food there, and he'd leave me there for days, take my car. He would leave me on the side of the road, middle of summer, middle of the day, take my phone, take my water, and make me walk miles to prove a point. He would threaten me when I would try to leave him. He would threaten me by threatening to harm my family, harm myself. And then I got out of that finally when he went to prison for 20 years. And then, he was holding somebody kidnapping in their own home. So good times. And then I met my ex-husband, who was incredibly abusive in front of my children. He would stomp on my face and hold my kids in his arms and say that I couldn't have them. So when you say that there was this shell, that, yes,
That's why.
there was
Yeah.
there was, but I never accepted that was normal, or that wasn't normal.
Right.
Like I never accepted. So when I started actually accepting it, that was when the shame would come in, where I'd say, I made these choices. I made these choices. Here's the fucking thing though. We don't know. We literally don't understand. And that has to account for something, because we can say that we know.
Exactly right.
But the fact of the matter is, I can't tell you how many people don't even know who they are. don't know what they want, don't understand their body sensations. Like
Right.
you talking about your heart, your heart and your stomach, right?
Yep.
There's GI issues associated with trauma. There's heart issues associated with trauma. There's so many neurons in your heart and in your gut that are associated with the trauma response because it sends the signal up. You then have to think about the stress response. Even after the triggering moment is done, you are still releasing those stress hormones, and you are literally, your body is unable to
Yep.
manage. So the whole point of my podcast is that it's not your fucking fault.
Yep.
Stop
Very well.
blaming yourself. Stop
Right.
shaming yourself.
Yep.
Get the fuck over your own ego,
Yep.
because what you're trying to do is you're trying to shame yourself. You're trying to blame somebody else. You're trying to blame yourself. You're trying to do anything possible instead of just accepting who you are. And what I love to say is if you can't grab your own ass, don't expect somebody else to. If you can't sit there and tell yourself in the mirror, you're a fucking badass, don't expect somebody else to. If
Right.
you
You're
can't
exactly right.
own every single part of yourself,
Yep.
don't fucking expect somebody else to.
Yep.
Because if you can't own who the fuck you are and accept the fact that for me, I was fucking molested, I was raped, I was fucking beat shitless. Like I had so many things that happened. My kids were taken from me by DCS because my ex-husband made up lies about me. And I had to fight. And the whole time he's playing games with the DCS workers and telling them these lies, and they're telling me that I'm the problem because he's manipulative and he's narcissistic, but it's not even diagnosed. So I have no fucking proof. And I always drop the charges every single time he injured me and with all the bruises that I had. And yet I was the problem. And so you get gaslit and gaslit and gaslit, and you learn how to gaslight yourself.
That's right. You're right on.
You
That's why I
downplay your
choose is so
feelings and your
powerful.
emotions.
Once I got onto I chose, now everything that happens is an intention,
Yes.
right? So I choose not to be used like that again.
Yes.
I choose not to believe. I don't go to a church currently. I don't have plans to. I'm not opposed to it, but I've chosen not to put anybody else up on that kind of a pedestal.
Love that. Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So once I chose, it no longer matters what happened, even though the pain matters. And we could talk on and on about how you're exactly right. I had GI issues. We talked about that before the show, severe to the point where I almost died. Yeah, I'm sure that's where that came from. Absolutely. You can't lay there on the floor from 12 o'clock till 4 o'clock, writhing in pain. That's it. That's strictly 100% emotional, right? We were playing sports and cards, and I was not hurting before the conversation. After the conversation, I was a mess, and for years after. So you're exactly right. But once I started choosing, then I got doctors. I found a woman who does not take that kind of advantage over me. She's a dominant, but she will never use that, has not so far chosen to use that on me to make me smaller. She makes me bigger. She makes me taller. She makes me feel safe, right?
Right.
I remember my first ex. So the first girl I dated, the way I got away from that is I chose to date Cindy. I had asked to date Cindy, and the family said no. We had a throwdown in Sugar Creek, Ohio, on tour till 4 o'clock in the morning. We had to be up at 7 to sing at a Mennonite church the next day. They basically told me, you will not. If you do, you're out of the group, etc. My sisters told me, look, Cindy wants to get with your sister, Sarah. She's a lesbian. She just hasn't told anyone yet. And we know this. And I'm like, no, not Cindy. We worked together. Like, she helped us load equipment and she was kind of my right-hand man. And I'm like, no, I love Cindy. Like, so I took, again, I wrote a breakup letter to Cindy. Got back to Minnesota from Florida tour and all the places we went on the East Coast, got back, and Cindy showed up at a show. And at that moment, and then my mom did the incredibly crazy thing. She invited Cindy to come help us for a couple more months. Cindy really just didn't have a place. Her mom, her job, there was just really nowhere for her to be. So she came and helped us. And in that time, I finally got the balls to stand up to my mom. And I asked Cindy, we were at the guest house getting some gear for the huge show we were doing. And she and I were working very, very hard because that was our part of the stage management. And so it was a private setting. And I said to Cindy, I said, I need to talk to you about that letter. And she goes, yeah, I just want you to know that a lot of girls wouldn't have taken that very well. And I was like, that's honest. And I said, I do want to date you though. And she's like, well, I've heard that before. And I'm like, my mom's not going to like it. And she's like, that's what I thought. I think she knew damn well that it wasn't me breaking up with her. It was my mom breaking up with her. Yeah. And my mom's not going to like it. She goes, that's what I thought. And she looked me dead in the eyes and she goes, I don't give a fuck. And I fell in love with Cindy right there because I'm like, you can say that about my mother. So I literally walked over to the Bain house where mom was busy doing her thing. And we were a hive of activity for the band. And I said, Mom, and I knew if I didn't do it right then, I would never, ever do it again. I looked her in the eye and I said, I can see there was a pass through we built in. I can see it in my mind's eye to this day. I said, Mom, I just talked to Cindy and we're definitely going to start dating. And she looked at me it was like slow motion. It was like her face hardened and she looked at me and she said, then you're out. I said, of the group? And she's like, yeah. And so the next couple of days, we finished our huge show. It was a video release party. Back then it was CDs and tapes, but CDs and tape release party. And I asked Dad on the way back from that, 2 days of nothing but work. And hundreds of people came and bought our new products, etc. It was a fun weekend. And I asked Dad on the way back, carrying all this gear back in the bus to the farm and all that. And I said, is Mom serious about me being out? And he's like, oh yeah. And my dad was the softie. So when he said that, I'm like, oh, it's done. So the next day, sleeping in my car in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, it was 30 below. I don't know why I went to Sioux Falls. I never did to this day know why I went there. But I slept in the car. The next day I had a cell phone and an apartment. I had no idea how to manage my money because in the cult, Mom did that. I didn't do that. I didn't have an account. I had one, but I never used it. I didn't know how to use it. So the next day I had a job as an electrical apprentice and a cell phone and an apartment. And I was dating Cindy and got engaged to Cindy until she told me she was a lesbian.
Right.
I shouldn't have been surprised. My sisters knew, but I didn't know. So, but that's how I got away. I finally got the guts to say, I'm going to do what I want to do, even if it's stupid and wrong. And of course, when Cindy broke up with me, I felt stupid. I'm like, wow, they were right. Because we had this long distance relationship. She really just wanted to get closer to my sister. In fact, she wanted to get pregnant. I know that because she tried. And I was such a good Christian boy at that point that I wouldn't finally do the deed. We did everything else, but I wouldn't do that. And I think that sort of ended that relationship because she just wanted to have a baby with one of us. And then she would be forced into contact with my sisters, etc. I didn't know those kind of games. I had no clue of that. I only just didn't do the full penetration because I'm like, well, I don't want you to hate me.
Yeah.
For no reason. That's what I told her. And I think she looked at me like, are you serious? Like a man's going to say no to this? And I'm like, yeah, this is not right. So anyway, that's how you asked how I got away. That's how I got away. And that never went back.
So I love that. And I think that that's really awesome how you didn't let the accountability part define you, right? Because you were like, okay, like I chose this, right? And it's easy, like I was saying, it's easy to go in that shame pit where you're like, I chose this. Why the fuck did I choose this? I can't even talk. Yep. But it's easy to sit there and be like, why did you do this? Why did you do this? Or even with the molestation, why did this happen?
Why didn't I do something different? Yep.
Right. And it's very easy to go in that, but I really love how you didn't let that define you. You said, you know what? This happened to me. Yep. I did choose it, but what am I going to do different? Right. Yep. And that's the big game changer, I think, is knowing that you need to make that change and actually making it,
say that the abuser is the giver of action.
Yeah.
Right. I chose how to respond to the giver of action. I didn't know my mom was mentally not fit. My dad was ultra passive, so he never got her committed or got her checked out for what was obviously really crazy shit. I grew up idolizing her. We say narcissist, definitely, for sure, undiagnosed.
And it makes you wonder though too. What I like to go over you like when I'm talking about one of my exes, right? Like the drug dealer or the ex-husband, or even the guy that I dated on and off for a few years that was emotionally unavailable, and he would degrade me, but he would degrade me, and I would like constantly like, you're not enough, you need to do this, you need to do that, always trying to fix
Code.
me,
Yeah.
right? But I didn't understand that it was because he had his own issues. So when I started growing, what the main game changer for me was looking at it from a perspective of, I wonder what they went through. So have you
Fair
ever
question.
looked at
Yeah.
what, like maybe if, you know, you had spoke. So like my mom and I had a lot of issues, a lot of anger towards her. And when I started growing, I confronted her and I said, these issues I've had. And she was like, wow. Like, and she started opening up to me about some of the issues that she'd had as a child. And when she started doing that, I had a whole new understanding of why she was that way. And then I started looking at, oh, this guy that I dated, he went through trauma when he was a child. This guy that I dated, he went through, being molested as a child. He went through being raped as a child. And I heard different stories and I was like, holy fuck.
Yep.
We sit there and we're like, this person was fucked up. This person was fucked up. This person did this to me. But
And
here's
they
the
were.
thing. They were,
Yep.
however, it wasn't them. And you and I talked about this before the podcast. It wasn't them, it was their actions. It
Yeah.
was
Yep.
their behaviors that they've learned from their own trauma.
Yep. Yep.
It's that
I think,
intergenerational trauma that they've carried on with them.
I think Zoom is going to kick me out for some reason. It's giving me this timer. So if you want to record more, I think I have to log out and log back in or something.
Maybe.
I don't pay for.
Just kidding, guys. Everything's fine. Everything's
Yep. I had to have Zoom explained to me. So I've been doing lots of personal coaching, mostly by phone for years and years and years. I don't do any Zoom coaching. I'm not opposed to it. I just don't have any clients that really want to do Zoom. I have in the past. So I appreciate your expertise around Zoom. You're better at it than I am by a long shot.
Yeah. I honestly didn't know anything about any kind of social media platform or anything tech related, honestly. And now look at me. I have a fucking app that's on Apple.
There you go.
Live on Apple. It's almost live on Google. And I have a podcast and I have social media platforms. And I'm like, oh, it is possible. Because that's the thing, is that trauma really does hold you back from your creative side.
Yes.
It holds you back from being able to get into your prefrontal cortex where you can actually expand on your creativity and expand on that deeper version of you, and we get so scared of tapping into that side that we don't realize that the more you tap into it, the more you grow, the more you tap into it, the more you grow, the more you tap into it. Like there's so much of your brain that you could be using, but we shame that side of us because that's what we learned, right?
Correct. Every time you tried to use it, somebody said, no, that's what you, why are you doing that? Or beat you or molested you or whatever, because they need you to be a compliant subject, right?
Yeah.
That's why they want you to not be thinking for yourself. They don't want to this day, all of these energy patterns show up. I've gotten to the place where I just watch energy patterns. So people that care about you will want you to find out what your joy is and live in that. So like you suggested earlier, if that's dropping the F-bomb every so often, hey, if that's who you are, I want you to do that, right? I mean, and even if I'm the kind of person that says, I don't want to hear the F word all the time, then I don't need to be around you. Right. But I also don't get to say you can't be that.
Exactly.
Right. Those are my choices. We do a frequency class where we say frequencies always match. They have to match. So if I'm up here in kindness and joy and my ex walks in anger, guilt, and dysfunction, there's going to be a shaking that starts because those two frequencies don't match. So I either have to drop to where my ex is. Yep. She has to raise to peace or kindness, right? One of those will happen. If I drop, we're going to start fighting because that's all she knows. Yeah. Right. She raises, we're going to have peace and quiet and we can work logically through something. However, there is one other option. And this is the one we see a lot of. And because it's scary, it can keep us in an unhealthy pattern, because the other option is you have to leave. One of you has to leave, right? So you match, either one goes up and one goes down, or one leaves. So generally, we get afraid to stay committed to the peace and kindness and even in internal talk, because we are being pulled so hard towards this person who's staying down here in doom and gloom and guilt and shame, all the things you suggested. And they're pulling real hard on us. And the threat is, if you don't meet me here, one of us will have to leave. You have to have the balls to say, well, then I'll leave, or you will. My
Yeah.
wife is really good at staying here so solidly, just staying, that this person always leaves.
Yeah.
And
Well,
they'll
and-
get worse before they get better, because first they try really hard to bring up shit to make move. And she's like, still having a great day. I hope you are. I just love you. You're awesome. And they're like, bye. Peace out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing too, is that like sitting there and just being okay, being
Yeah.
okay with who you are,
Inside
being
of you.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And really honing in on who you are. Because
Yep.
like you said, when I worked at, Big Nose Kate's, it was like there was a piece of me that just wasn't happy. And
Yep.
I would pick on every single thing at that job. Like, I didn't like this. I didn't like this. And I remember people telling me like, oh, they just didn't understand, and it wasn't anything negatively on them, but
Right.
they just didn't understand me because I was on a different path than them.
Was not
And
going to fit
so
you.
yeah, yeah. And so they would, oh, well, you're acting very emotional. You need to start smoking cigarettes, because they didn't know who yeah, they were like, you need to start smoking again. And I was like, what the fuck did you just say to me? And it took me years to quit smoking. And when I finally did it, it was the most empowering thing. And I was like, no, like you said, they try to bring you down. And once you have that grounding, you start realizing, and then you start realizing things in people, like
Right.
I know that I'm sure that when you hang out with your mom now, you're like seeing all these different patterns, right? So I'm curious how often you've actually like looked at, and we only have a few minutes left here, but
Okay.
I'm curious to see what you actually looked at in your mom, like when you started doing this growing and changing path, how often you'd actually see a different side of her, where it wasn't like, you did this to me. It was more so like, my poor mom, thinking of her as a child.
A long-term friend wrote me a letter, Facebook thing, and she said, I read your book. And I was like, oh shit, because everything's in there. I'm like, this is not going to go well, right? Girl that I wanted to date, actually, and on a whole different level, but I really trusted her. I trusted her response towards my family, and everything was above board. It was a good situation. And I said, oh boy, what is she going to say? And she said, it's her message was, she said, it's going to be long. And I'm like, oh boy, how can you talk to your mom about that way? A lot of people still idolize my mom to this day, by the way. Many people still think she's just the cat's ass, and they hate this book. They hate it because it pokes holes in that idea, right?
Right.
That was the point, by the way, was to demonize her. The point was to be truthful, So anyway, Anna sent me this message, and she said, I can tell that you deeply love your mom and you have no resentment towards her. And I'm like, that made me cry. I'm like, how? Okay, I love hearing that, but why would you say that? And she said, because you nailed everything in the book about what was great about your mom.
Wow.
And I'm like, well, I'm so glad that you see it that way, and that came across, because when you're writing about yourself, it can be really, our ego gets in, and then we're like, I want to make me look good. I want to make sure everybody else doesn't look quite as good. And so one of the things that came to me in the book was that my mom is miserable. She was taught, or thought she was taught, because my grandfather I loved dearly, and he was very abusive. He was an alcoholic, but I loved him till he died. But that was her dad. And she learned a very, very unhealthy self-talk. She would stay up till 2 a.m. reading the Bible, praying, but really what she was doing was trashing herself internally. You could tell by what she would say about herself later and what she would then say about everyone else. So one of the things I know for sure about my mom, and I've said this recently to family, friends, and I'm like, I just hope mom is having a great time, because she's denied herself that, right? A lot of the misery and abuse came from her thinking she needed to be something other than what she was. And that creates this horrible, awful pressure and internal discourse. And so, yes, I would say I can see my mom's. There also is with my mom, there's probably an added, if I told you long, detailed stories about things she's done and said, there's probably an added piece of mental health that is a real thing. I'm not a psychologist, I'm a life coach. Psychiatry deals more in like chemical imbalances. She was deeply badly burned when she was 2. She had rheumatoid arthritis. There's a few things that happened that resulted in super high temperatures in her body that can literally do brain damage. If you're not aware of that and you don't want to get help for it, you can continue to be bipolar, whatever the labels are. Narcissistic is an easy one to throw out there, but very likely she's had some actual physical damage. In fact, after I left, there was a story that I didn't know anything about. My sister, who's still connected to me and them, and wrote the foreword to my book, which I was really grateful for, basically saying he's not crazy. This stuff really happened. But she said, yeah, after you left, like years after you left, mom had a mental breakdown and she was in the loony bin. And I'm like, really? Because she had everything so together. She's like, yeah, they said that she had such a bad headache that she fractured her skull without hitting it on anything. Like she just basically created that much mental pressure of some kind. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that something's wrong that she needs help with. So I don't take it personal that she did that to me, right? She did that because she was just surviving with the tools she was given.
That's awesome. I mean, it's not awesome.
No, I know what you mean. Right.
But no, seeing that. So isn't that interesting though? When you look at the beginning and now you're looking at the end of the podcast, isn't that interesting? Like kind of how I was telling you, this is how we're going to do it, and seeing the way that you were talking about it at the beginning and how you're talking about it now is just like, this is exactly why we do what we do, right? Because being honest, raw, vulnerable,
it works.
It works.
I wanted to say before we run out of time, I appreciate you sharing your story, because many, many people wouldn't be that. And you glossed over some stuff really quick that is deep, deep pain. And the first time you told it, you probably cried. We're a basket case, but to be able to get now to go over the high points.
I cried during the podcast, the whole podcast.
If you don't tell your victim story, so you can get hooked. I know coaches that get hooked over here on responsible and they won't listen to the victim story. No, you have to tell it. If you don't let out what happened to you, around you, you can't move to responsible because you're inside. You're still going, yeah, but that hurt. Yeah, you have to say it. You have to own the victim story. And then you can go to, okay, what did I learn? What will I choose? What will I do differently? Was it really about me? Was it really my ego? Was it their ego? Was it even really about my mom? No, it wasn't. It's for me to learn. I'm working on a book that I want to write called God is Learning. My dad his hair would catch on fire if he even heard the title. But my idea is that experts are difficult because they know everything. Mm-hmm. And that I believe in still to this day would not come across that he knew everything, because he wants to know me. How can he know me if he knows everything? Yeah. So the example I give is my daughter. There's the bungee cord. How long should my bungee cord be for jumping off a bridge? That's a scientific answer. God knows that. How much fuel will the lunar rover use and where will it stop? That's a scientific answer. God knows that. My daughter is in front of a man who's down on one knee and he's proposing. That one's different. Yeah. I'm her dad. I don't know what she's going to say or why. I know her better than most men, but I don't know what she's going to say because I was asked. And I'm like, I think this is where God is learning. And I think this is where we are learning, right? Who am I? What drives me? That's back to your point about who is in the fucking mirror. Exactly. And with that, guys, thank you so much for staying on here, listening to us banter back and forth. I really loved having you, Josh. I would love to have you again, and we can have more talks about it. Maybe we can even talk about, you reading the book. Sure. The body keeps the score. Maybe. I don't know. Who's to say what the future holds? But I hope you guys fucking enjoyed. You guys rock out the fucking week, and I will see you next week.